Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now today I'm going to tackle something from an upcoming Kickstarter. This is the Dark Lord's Fallen Legions. And those of you who've been wanting to see some more Lord of the Rings content on the channel, hopefully this will be something which strikes your interest. Now the Kickstarter is going to feature files for both a Eastern Immortal styled army, so this fella that we've got in front of me here, and a Varangian sort of Northman looking thing, which kind of looks like some of the concept artwork for the Easterlings from the Return of the King, Peter Jackson's Return of the King. And they are so cool. They are so cool. So if you've got a 3D printer, I'll make sure that there are links in the description. You can chase along, see more of those for yourself. But I wanted to do something kind of traditional. So we're going to follow along. I have the colors here for the Easterlings as from Lord of the Rings strategy. What are they calling it now? Lord of the Rings strategy battle game? Anyhow, let's not worry about that. I'll list all of the paints in the description below. Let's get started. So after cleaning off and assembling this guy, I've hit him with a primer spray of Retributor armor. Now you don't strictly necessarily need to use a gold primer. You could use even a silver or a light grey and give it a couple of coats of Retributor armor out of the pot. This is much quicker though, and you do get a fairly reasonable result, I would say. It's probably one of my favourite gold primers out there. It is pretty pricey these days, but if you've got a project where you need a lot of gold, it's not a bad investment. And one of the cool things about these, and I'm going to call them kits from here on, is that the torsos are one piece and then the arms are separate. So if you're printing off a bunch of them, you're going to have some options for posing too, which is a nice little touch. But because there are some areas that I know I have missed with my primer, what I've got is a little Retributor armor from the pot. And I'm going to go over the whole miniature with this. You'll see, as well as cleaning up those little spots that I've missed, it does make that gold a little more rich. So I'm going to make sure to hit everything with this. It does not take terribly long. A nice wedge tip brush will help you jam in. It's a little. The pose is such a difficult one to show you anything on, because he's hiding most of his body. But anyhow, away we go, and let's touch up this gold. You'll see he's looking a little warmer. That's pretty nice. What I'm going to do now is lay down the black clothing. And as I say all the time, don't use black for black. It sounds a little counterintuitive, but in reality, we don't want black because there's nothing you can do with it. You have to highlight it. It takes a lot of extra work. Whereas black clothing on our miniatures, if you use a very dark grey, you're going to get a better result. So I have here, this is Vallejo Black Grey. And as you see, oh, that's just perfect. You can stick to Citadel if you want to use Corvus Black here. It's a very similar color, but I tend to find the coverage is not quite on par. Now, I'm going to paint in all of his trousers, including his leg wraps. And now I've just mentioned using this for clothing, but if you do want to save some time and save yourself having to buy another paint, you can paint in the shaft of his spear with this as well. And that once we shade that, that's going to look black. Now, it is up to you if you go the route of painting his gloves in black. The Easterling costumes, they actually have scale mail gauntlets which go over the back of their fingers, which looks amazing, but from the perspective of 3D printing would just be insane to try and get that coming off properly. So these little plates on the back of the hand, I've left those gold, but cloth gloves I thought was going to look more reasonable. We're going to carry on painting the base coats here, and I have Mephiston red. Let you guess what we're going to paint with that. His jacket, you'll see this covers really well over what is essentially a yellow primer. But anywhere that you do need to come back and give it a second coat, that is up to you. Now up on his face, I'm just going to finish what I'm doing here. There we go. Up on his face, he's got a gold faceplate, but then he's got a fair bit of cloth around his neck and chest. So take your time, swap on down to a smaller brush if you need to, and don't worry too much if you do make a mistake here, because we haven't done anything else to the gold. It's not going to be too difficult to tidy up if we need to. I don't mind admitting that I've gotten so much red in places I don't want red, but like I said, we are going to fix that up. Now these leg wraps are a really good example of something that you could leave as they are. You know, if you want to just smash out an army very quickly, but a little bit of variation here is going to look quite nice. So I have some Mechanicus Standard Grey, and any grey, Storm Vermin fur or similar would work perfectly well here. Now sometimes I've seen the straps on armor and what have you painted in this grey too, but that is a personal choice. I'm going to do mine a brown leather because I think that's going to offset the red a little more nicely. But we are painting something which is made up toy soldier man, so paint him how you like. I come to you now bearing a great wisdom, and it is the wisdom of flat brown. This is a Vallejo model color, and it's very similar to Mournfang brown, but it is a little bit darker, and it is a little, like a fraction more red. The difference between them is not enough that I'd say if you have Mournfang brown and you're happy using it, then a couple of thin coats of that is going to do you just fine. But I like my flat brown for leather. So all of the leather bits, I mean, spoiler warning, go ahead now, and I'm going to pop a coat of this on. Now, there isn't a huge amount of leather, but if you did want to change things up, I'd probably suggest slightly darker boots. I'm really just looking for ways to cut down on time spent and the number of paints we're going to need, so I've done them in the same leathery brown as everything else. Now speaking of different shades of brown, I have here beige brown from Vallejo. This one's very similar to Steel Legion Drab, but probably a little, I would say this is a little more saturated. And when this is shaded, this makes a wonderful wood color. So I'm going to apply this. The Easterling shields from the Lord of the Rings, they have like a wooden boss, versus these ones which look as though there's a wooden section over the top which then has more gold. Entirely up to you how you want to do this, but I figure the, what do you call it, the engraving and what have you on these would make more sense on gold. So I'm going to paint this section in wood instead. Now, same too, one of the other really cool things about the sculpts is that the back of the shields is a little, a little challenge to show you, but there are actually guides where you can paint the wood on the inside too. So I'm going to take my time with the camera out of the way and do those as well. It doesn't look like much yet, but I promise that it's going to look way more like wood in a minute. I've got now here some Iron Hand steel, and I'm using this instead of something like lead belcher because I want to apply this to the metal parts, shade it, and then call it done. By using a lighter base coat like this, it's going to save us a little bit of work, particularly, again, focusing on our army painting. Now all that remains is to go back to my Retributor armor, and I'm going to touch up some of the little mistakes that I've made with that. Honestly, at this stage, it's not a huge amount left to do. All we're going to do is shade them and then a few highlights. Something I really like about the project too, just while I'm thinking about it, is that for something which is, you know, with all the love in the world, very clearly based on the Lord of the Rings, there's a little bit of lore included on the Kickstarter page talking about these guys and their scale mail and the dragon masks they wear when they get ranked up and stuff. It's really cool. I like those little touches for projects like this. Anyhow, let's finish this off and be back in a second. Particularly when you are army painting, don't worry too much if some of the gaps and recesses of your miniature are not perfectly done, because the shader is going to obscure a lot of that. So I've shaken up my Agrax Earthshade, and I've got a big old brush here because we're going to apply a lot of this. So just start bucketing it over the entire miniature. Really working it into the recesses, making sure that there's no detail left glowing without some of this on it. But yeah, knock yourself out, have some fun, jam on some Agrax Earthshade, and then we're going to leave this for about half an hour to dry. Help if I get that in shot, actually, but yeah, here we go. And ta-da! That is, well, finished. I say all the time that what you can do is, for your bulk infantry, just smash them out really quickly, and you're not too fussed about anything beyond the effect of a large unit. Now, that's nothing spectacular, but what I'm going to do to show you that is just grab a little bit of sterling mud and a couple of dry brushes. The base recipe will be in the description, but we'll skip over that. Let's just base him real quick and see what he looks like essentially ready for the table. Just a very quick and simple base and a couple of tufts, and you have something that you can put on the table very happily. Now, this is how we used to do it for Games Day. You just bucket huge handfuls of miniatures onto the table, and you'd rely on spectacle to carry the day. And I think that's true for most infantry-based armies. This dude will look fine on the table, particularly if you're playing D&D, you want some generic baddies. These guys are cool. But we can take it a little further, and I would feel bad if we didn't. So what we're going to do is start off by getting some Sigmarite. And I have a little, very cheap brush from in the stationery aisle in my local supermarket of all places. And what I'm going to do is lightly dry brush some areas of gold that I want to shine a little bit more. Now, the reason why I'm doing this at this stage is that if we do the dry brushing now, and I make any mistakes, I go over brown or red or what have you, it's not going to matter too much because I can either highlight those and fix them up in the process, but really the gold is the star of this dude. So a little bit of dry brushing just to lighten this up again. Really quickly, one of the other benefits to using a wedge tip or a flat tip brush for your dry brushing is you normally find it a little easier to get in sideways with your brush and get into some of these smaller areas so you can still reach them with the same brush. Now that's going to brighten them up quite a lot and reintroduce a bit of depth to that gold that we might otherwise have been lacking. You'll see one or two spatters, particularly on a shield there, but like I said, we can fix those very easily. What I've got now is another one of these old ratty brushes. Seriously, go check out your local stationery store or in your supermarket. Look for cheap, nasty brushes. They're always useful for something. With some Necron compound and this smaller brush, I'm just going to lightly dry brush extreme edges where we want to really catch a shiny detail. So up on his helmet here, these little prongs, let's go over those a couple of times. And we can essentially get a really shiny highlight, still not doing an awful lot of work, which is just perfect. Now, isn't that magic? That doesn't take much to do at all, but that little bit of silver really adds a whole bunch to the gold. You can see there's a little splash down here where I've kind of overdone it. If you want to tidy that up, then a bit of Liberator gold over the top is going to do just fine to get rid of that splotch. But honestly, I'm not too fussed. You could even try doing that straight over the shaded Retributor armor. I think the Sigmarite is going to give you a slightly nicer, more brassy finish, but that's just fine, eh? That's going to work perfectly on the table. We're going to highlight now the red, and I've got Evil Sun's Scarlet for this. Our cloak in particular is going to have some really raised high points, which the shade has avoided, and honestly, that's the hard work done. Just follow along these with a little bit of bright paint. I quite like, especially on miniatures at this scale, I quite like really pronounced highlights because they're going to look good at table distance. Unfortunately, most of my painting doesn't tend to photograph particularly well because you're painting in a different style. But it will look cool on the table, and that's what I want. Now that is super quick. It'll give you a really nice, pronounced change in color. I think it looks brilliant. Your mileage may vary, of course, but we're talking about bulk infantry on the table. He's going to look happy as. Now I am realizing only now that while I had the Necron compound out earlier, I should have very lightly dry brushed the metal parts. But once I've done with this, I'm going to take him outside. I'm going to hit him with a matte varnish, and we'll get a look at what he looks like once he's ready for the table with the rest of his mates. And there we have it at last. Our Eastern Immortal is complete. And I really enjoyed painting this guy. It was fun to shake out the rust a little and just paint something gold and red. Although it wasn't that long since I did a Custodian. Never mind. Anyhow, the files for these are already sculpted. So as far as like risks for Kickstarters, I've backed the last two from Quartermaster 3D, and fulfillment on these was really quick. They're brilliant. Easy to print. I've been really happy with what I've had, and I'm thoroughly looking forward to seeing the stretch goals on this one come through. So I'll pop a link in the description to make sure that you can go and pledge if you fancy, or pick up this sample file if you want to have a play around at home. So thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, and all of the patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my wonderful producers, Alan Nuttall, Kyrie Crawford, Trainboy, Fred, and Jimmy. Your support lets me do this stuff. Any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comments box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.